This is Nick from Agency Acquisitions, and today I'm going to be covering how to get the most out of your people. People is the hardest thing to optimize, and here's why. At the end of the day, there's only four major things that you can optimize from like the most macro setting. Number one, capital, like where you put your money. Number two, code, which some agencies have, but most don't, but it's about the technology that you're using, and if you have a technology that you've made, even better. Number three is content, meaning marketing content, but also internal content for training and like SOPs, video systems, like that's your content. And number four is labor. And this is really what we're going to get into. Labor is the hardest thing to optimize because people get misaligned really, really easily. And so what I'm going to show you today is how I did it. I took my agency from, below 10% profit to being able to do, above 40% profit. I've done this for other agencies as well, and the system works because we're getting people aligned and we're putting them in a place where they can individually succeed and succeed as a team and organization, okay? So what we're going to go over today is what I call the objective metric KPI system. And this matters, okay? Because what people don't do in an agency is that they misunderstand what the objectives of people are. So when people come in, people are given a job description. And the job descriptions are these generic sounding bullet points that say like, hey, like roughly this is what you're doing day to day. But by reading that job description, people don't know what constitutes success and failure. So we need to actually get more granular and say like, no, like, okay, these things are good and whatever else have you, but we ultimately have 2 to 5 objectives per role. And here's the objective for your role, 1, 2, 3, etc. Each objective is then measured by a metric, okay? So here's the objective, the goal. Here is the measurement we're going to use to measure how well we did against that goal. And metrics are generally, rear view mirror items that you're measuring money, you're measuring an outcome that happened like in the past. We need a way to actually predict the future, which is where KPIs come in. So the KPI allows us to understand where the metric is going to be, like with, relative accuracy, right? And so why is this the key to alignment? Well, what happens is that when people are misaligned, the organization doesn't perform, and misalignment causes friction. Friction creates that underperformance, okay? And we want to prevent the underperformance. So what is it that we need to do? Well, we need to get people aligned. That's what we need to do. So let's get through this one, okay? There's 2 primary requirements for alignment to happen. Alignment meaning ultimately better productivity, better profitability, like you name it, it makes everybody's life easier. We need alignment between the company and the individual role, okay? So the individual employee and role. So how do the organization's goals align with the individual's goals? They have to be the same, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to work effectively. And then secondly, there needs to be alignment between employees. So if you tell one person, it's like, these are your goals, and you tell a separate party that interacts with that party, these are your goals over here, and they're so far apart, it's going to create that friction because people are now trying to optimize for different things, and they're not going to get the result that they want, either one of them, and which means that the organization will ultimately not get what it wants either. So this is what it means. The objectives need to fit together. Sometimes they might be the same, sometimes they might be different, but if they are different, they're pointing in the same direction, meaning that there's cohesion between the individual person, the other people that they're in direct contact with, and the people that those people are in contact with, like so on and so forth. So like concentric circles outwards, everybody is working towards the same direction, which is aligned with the company organization goals, right? So like not any individual persons. These are generally like what the CEOs after, or the presidents after, or the agency owner, right? All these things have to be aligned. But then why are so many job descriptions misaligned with this? It's like, that's a problem. That's why we need this objectives carve out within every single job description and be able to put these things in front of them. So how do we firstly align the individual with a company? So let me tell you what you're maybe hearing if people are misaligned, okay? That task or project was done technically correct. So we didn't succeed, we didn't win, the client's not happy with us, or organizational goals are being failed, but the person says, well, I did this technically correct. Okay, like that's a huge flag that misalignment is there. That is not my job. It's like, well, if is the objective within your job or is it not? Right? This is generally because people don't have the objectives in the first place. And then lastly, key result is not my responsibility, right? But if it's things like client retention, client value, like generating value for our customers, it's everyone's responsibility, right? So these are things that occur when misalignment occurs and when people don't really know what their job actually is because we have not communicated what their jobs actually are. So how do we get alignment? Well, we use the objective metric KPI system. Objective is the thing that the company requires. Metric is how we measure that thing, and the KPI is how that what's that metric going to look like in the future. So something that can predict what the metric will look like. So let's get to an example here. Okay, so I'm going to use a digital strategist as the example. And how I would position a digital strategist, like, look, digital strategists come in different forms. Some of them are client facing, some of them are not. But like, let's imagine that this is a client facing digital strategist, okay? And my argument is that if they are client facing or not, this probably wouldn't change a lot. So number one objective is client retention, right? So like the longer we retain the client for, the better, okay? Assuming our pricing is good. Number two, client results, right? So first comes retention, second comes results. Yes, results are a big part of client retention, but they're not the full picture, right? Like it's a big part of it. And lastly, production, which means like how much did they produce? Like how productive were they? And I don't care if you measure this in dollars, in hours, effective hourly rate of an individual or function. It doesn't matter. It's all productivity. So however you measure productivity, that's a different video. How are we measuring things? Okay. So how do we put this together? Okay, well, let's keep this like pretty simple. We have the objective of client retention. How should we measure that? We measure that with client churn, right? So we're measuring the client retention objective with client churn, okay? And what could predict client churn? Well, net promoter score. Like an NPS score will predict if a customer is going to churn. Guess what? Like if you score like a 2 out of 10 on an NPS, that means that the client's not happy, right? That means you're going to churn the client. So the KPI predicts the metric of client churn, right? Because we ultimately want to measure client retention. Now, the other way of looking at this, I like doing client churn because to me it makes a lot of sense because it incorporates lifetime value. Lifetime value is inside of the client churn metric. Other people use client LTV, and that's perfectly fine, okay? So client retention, client churn, or LTV, whichever you prefer, and then net promoter score. That's objective number one. And by the way, these are in rank order. Like the reason it's 1, 2, and 3 over here is because that is the order, and the order matters. It's like, yeah, we want people to be productive, but guess what? Number 1 is up here. Number 2 is like right below number 1, and number 3 is like, it's like over here. It's good to have. But people have less control over their productivity, especially if you're not giving them enough work. So how can they be productive if they don't have enough work? So it is rank ordered and it matters. Number 2, client results. They're a digital strategist. So ROAS, MER, whatever, like it might change per client. They might just want leads. They might just want raw revenue. Like who knows? Like we need to have those conversations with client. We need to figure out what their primary metric is. That becomes the metric on a per client basis. Okay. And we can put this into a dashboard later. I can show you how later. And the KPI would be like, for example, like click-through rate. It's like, or like any other number of things, right? It's like, oh, we're getting really good clicks on this, or, we're getting a lot of people to the landing page or the product page or whatever, like, or add to carts, whatever it is, but it's not the metric. So like, how can we predict the metric that it's going to occur, right? Last one would be productivity, build hours or money built, or like, revenue under management. Like there's a ton of ways of doing this. The KPI would be utilization rate or money under management. Like that's the KPI. Right? So it all kind of like nicely fits together, right? You have like number 1, number 2, and number 3 in rank order, and then you explain to people that that's the rank order, and then people are aligned, like they're aligned to their objectives. Now, that's at the individual level, right? So let's break down the logic on this thing. Okay. If we have a high client lifetime value, can we lose? Can the agency lose if client lifetime value is constantly being maximized? Not likely. And the client, so we're retaining client for a long time and they're happy with the results. Can we upsell them? Can we get testimonials for them? Yeah. Like if they're with us for a long time and they're ecstatic about the results because they're amazing, we're going to be able to get those testimonials and referrals. And if each person billing revenue is billing enough hours or, has enough money under management or their effective hourly rate's really high, and we're getting those upsells and we're getting really long LTV, what is the chance that our agency isn't going to have great profit? It's like, we are going to have great profit without a doubt. And so that's how we get alignment to the company and the individual. So the individual and the company are aligned because, these three things, very attractive to the organization. So it's going to be attractive to the employee, right? Now they have things that they know that they need to do in rank order. It's like, this is what matters. Okay. So how do we align all of them? Because other people might have different objectives, but that might look slightly similar. Okay. This is where I'm going to make an argument that every single person, to get people aligned between people and the organization. So this is not person to organization. This is people to people. Okay. They have to have a singular focus of client value. This is why there needs to be some sort of client value, culture item or values or something needs to point at client value, no matter what. I believe the best way to measure client value is based on lifetime value or client churn, whichever one you want. And this is what creates friction, right? Because people aren't aligned with this client value thing. And if we measure client value with the LTV, well, the first thing people are going to say is that's not my problem, right? So they'll put all the client retention solely on the accounts team or the accounts or the client facing individuals. That's a problem, right? Because if people are I technically did my job correct, but I have no impact on retention. It's of course you have an impact on retention, either directly or indirectly, because if you're doing work that the client is going to get one way or another, it affects it. So even if the digital strategist is not client facing, they should be judged on client lifetime value, right? Because there's other things that influence client retention, like insights brought to the table, doing a quick loom and sending it to the accounts person to send to the client. It's hey, this is how your account's going, blah, 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 etc. There's systems and processes that should be put in place to enable people working on the account to expose themselves to the client in some way, shape, or form, and at least their knowledge or insights, right? So it's a full contact, full team sport, this client value, client retention thing, right? When people aren't aligned to that, well, people are not going to be accountable over client retention. So over time, we're going to optimize towards the things that don't drive client value. So have you seen somebody optimize towards things that don't drive client value? Example, hey, we got a ton of clicks on this, or we got a ton of this, or hey, I told the client that the due date, but that made them happy, but well, you didn't check with the team if we could even do that due date, right? So they start optimizing for things that will make their own lives easier. And I call this optimizing for ego, right? So the worst case is they optimize for ego, which create the trap of being technically correct, but optimizing for ego, personal needs, making your own personal life easier, will result over time in losing the client, right? Because it's well, I did my job technically correct. I put in my hours. I did this. I did that. It's okay, but how is this anchored to the client actually winning? How is it connected to winning? And how is it connected to the objective? The objective being client value, the objective being, the metric being measured, LTV. How is it connected? And if it's not connected, then we're on the wrong side of the equation here, right? So this is what the pushback is going to be if you try to do this. I'm not client facing. I have no control over the client. It is not my job. And other variations of I'm not responsible for the client. If you're working on client work, you are responsible for client value. Client value is measured by LTV. So if you're not client facing, you can drive insights that the accounts person that is client facing can share with a client. You can enhance the experience by shooting Loom videos and giving them updates. There's a million and one ways that you can enhance client value in your position, even if you're not client facing. So we need people to come together, because otherwise what happens is like, well, I did my job technically correct and I'm just going to drop this here. We don't have alignment. Alignment causes friction. Friction causes mistakes. Mistakes means clients leave, right? So how do we make the shift to being client value centric? Well, here's the 6 steps we need to take, okay? Like, this is tactical stuff. Get everybody's feedback on why they should not be responsible for client retention and compile it. So like all of these reasons up here that people are going to tell you, like, this is why we should not be responsible. Make the full list of it. You're like, they're all variations on really number 3, but we need to listen to people. This is change management. We need to listen to people and why they believe this is true. Thank everybody for their feedback after it's been compiled, and explain to them that this has been incorporated in this system to ensure that everyone is, you know, like, can actually affect this client value and client retention thing. Okay. NPS dashboard, right? That way we know how happy the client is on an experience side. Okay. Number 2, clients results dashboard. So we're going to be tracking the results, because if they're not client facing, well, they're doing client results. That's going to affect retention greatly. Okay. Client churn dashboard. So we know what people are churning, you know, what clients are churning and when, etc. Quarterly brainstorming for insights. That means that even if you're not client facing, you come together in an internal meeting and give all your ideas of how the client can improve the results or improve what the client ultimately wants from the agency, right? Those ideas are going to help carry the client further into the future by giving them a plan. We're now leading the client. They're not going to drop us because it's like, oh, like, they never bring me fresh ideas and blah, blah, blah. So everybody gets a hand in influencing the outcomes for the client. Inside of the Net Promoter Score, we are going to be asking the client questions, okay? So we send the NPS, we get it back, and then we're going to call the client. So that NPS is quantitative, so it's a number. They're going to assign us a number. Then whether they answer the question or not. So if they didn't answer, we're going to call them in 2-3 days if they didn't answer the survey. And if they did answer the survey, we're going to call them anyway and ask them, it's like, hey, like, why did you give us that score? Whether it's good, bad, medium, doesn't matter. Why? Because we want those qualitative insights. Like, what are you missing in the client value equation? Like, what is going on, right? And we're going to run this every quarter. I like to run it every month, but at worst, run it every quarter. And if you're running it quarterly, for sure, run it after all major initiatives and projects over a certain threshold amount. So for example, like, if the average project or the average retainer that you have is like, you know, 5 to 10K, or like a project is like 20 to 30K, create a threshold amount. It's like, this project is big and meaningful. So it's like, oh, this project's $40,000. We're NPSing just that project. So we know how the project actually went. Okay. So we need to be doing this over a threshold amount. It's different for every agency. This means we can get the measure on how creative is functioning and things that are a lot harder to measure on that client results side, right? We need this qualitative measurement. That way we can say, like, well, who was responsible for that? Client results, everyone has a metric or a KPI, and in some cases it will only be NPS. So like I said before, sometimes NPS is that measure, but everybody else should have metrics and KPIs. So like, are we trying to hit like a certain like marketing efficiency ratio, ROAS, sales number, combination of? Everybody in the company that is client work, doing client work, needs to have a metric and KPI to measure client success. And the worst case scenario is NPS. We're also going to create this client offboarding document. We're going to interview the client and we're going to generate feedback. So why is the client leaving, right? So why is that value not being rendered, right? That way we can get to the bottom of where the client value equation fell apart, and we can improve it, but then we also know who's responsible. But mostly it's about improvement, right? So we can like then improve the system, give training, all that good stuff, right? Lastly, the quarterly brainstorming to bring client value. That way everybody gets a chance to affect results. So how does this work practically? Ultimately, these things that I just explained means that everybody has an input and there's a catch-all. So like this down here is the catch-all. It's going to catch everything that the top system doesn't catch, right? So we have our client results dashboard. we have our NPS dashboard, and they work back and forth. Okay, meaning, if the client results are good, but the NPS is bad, it's like, why? Why is the NPS bad? We need to dig in and get that qualitative feedback from the client one-to-one. Generally, what's going to happen, like if your client results are good, which I assume they're going to be for the majority of your clients, because you should be good at what you do and you should only be selling the stuff you're good at. Client results are going to be good as long as you can retain the client for long enough. If the NPS is bad, it generally comes down to the client saying, well, we're not getting the value that we feel we should have, or you're not leading us. We were looking for more insights. But whenever you hear like a client say that they feel like they're not being led, it's generally about insights, okay? And that's where the quarterly brainstorming comes in, because at worst, and that's internal, and then we're going to present to the client on a quarterly basis like all of our ideas, like, hey, this is what we see in the market. These are the new technologies. These are all the things that are happening, and we're going to give them insights on how those things are connected to their brand and what the opportunities are. So you're bringing opportunities, you're bringing insights to them. So what's going to happen is when you connect all three of these pieces together, we know what the client results are. We know how the client feels. Okay. So results check. They feel okay. Like they don't feel as good as the results are. Oh, okay. We need more insights, right? We need more of this. If the NPS comes back and it's like a 9 or 10, would absolutely recommend you. It's like, that means it's testimonial time. It's like all's well with the world. But the thing is, it can change, and that's why we do it quarterly. So this system gives us a complete view and enables us to call on different team members, whether they're client facing or not, to help drive that client value, help drive that lifetime value for the agency, and ensuring clients stay with us. And guess what? If all else fails, we have this client offboarding that's finalized, and we have this churn dashboard that tells us what happened in the rear view mirror. So this stuff is the proactive stuff that we can do to prevent the client from leaving us in the first place. And that's a full team, full contact sport. That's what this here is up top. And if the worst happens, the client does leave us, we get an understanding of why they left and what systems, training, and etc. we can do in order to help people not do it again, right? So it's okay to make mistakes, but it's unacceptable not to learn from them. We have to learn from the mistakes and the errors that we have made. Conclusion time. It all comes back to this objective metric KPI system. Every single person needs 2 to 5 objectives per role, okay? Those things, each one of those needs a metric, and each one of those things needs at least one KPI, okay? Why does this matter? When we have objective clarity, it's one of the main things that we need to drive efficiency, savings, profit, okay? We need objectives. Then we need the right data. That data needs to be put into these dashboards that measure the future and past. Future meaning KPIs, past meaning metrics. Then we have objective dashboards. So this is what ends up happening. We need those objective dashboards so that people know where they stand, right? Because they have objective clarity and they have objective dashboards. Save this for later. Like, this matters, but if you have objective clarity and you have objective dashboards, people know how they're doing quantitatively. And this is going to drive an unbelievable amount of alignment, team efficiency, time savings, etc. This is the core takeaway. Get objective clarity, get those metrics and KPIs, get that data feeding these dashboards where people can see if they're meeting those objectives. And when they're meeting those objectives, reward them, right? Reward them with positive feedback, reward them with, more education, reward them with money, reward them with, step up opportunities, like reward them every single way you can and enable them to do these objectives. Okay. That way there's alignment between top leadership, middle management, and the people doing the day-to-day work. We're all nice and aligned because we have that alignment between the company, the management, and the people doing the work. We're all aligned and in the same boat together. If you found this content valuable, consider subscribing and check out the link section below where you can find my other resources. Hit the subscribe button as I will be uploading more videos every single week.